I think those are all important things. The communication, like we really do need to, particularly as men, sit down with our sons and talk to them about this.
Man found dead over the random attack.
About a spike in domestic violence.
Welcome back, Nicole.
Welcome back, Dave. How's it going?
I am doing well, and yourself?
I'm doing really good.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we're talking about a big topic today.
Yes.
We're talking about love.
Yes.
Love, all kinds of love. Love can be a wonderful thing, but it's also the motive behind a lot of criminal cases that you've witnessed too. So it can be a very dangerous thing. Would you agree?
I would say that love misconstrued can be behind a
Right.
lot of criminal things.
Right.
You know, I think that love as a feeling shouldn't be behind anything criminal, but I think we sometimes misconstrue it and create these what some people would call crimes of passion, and which aren't passionate at all.
Right.
You know,
Right.
but this is how we sort of framed it.
But they're driven by maybe the loss of love, heartbreak,
That's
it
right.
has to do a lot of the times with
That's-
that, with the pain that can come from it, or like you say, misconstrued.
That's right, and I think it is. I think that's exactly what it is. It's misconstrued.
And we all, have a different definition of love.
Yeah.
Children also view love differently than adults do.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, it's interesting. Favorite quote I read once, it was on a social media post, so how truthful it was, I don't know. But I remember one little boy, when he was asked to describe what love was, he said, love is the way I say your name in my mouth. You just know it's to be safe.
Right.
And I think that that's a really good description of what love could be.
That actually reminds me of something my youngest daughter told me one night. It was Daddy's turn to put her to bed. She really wanted me to put her to bed that night, but I said, no, Mommy's going to be putting your sister to bed tonight, because we switch every night who puts who to bed. But she said to me, Mommy, can't you just jump inside my heart so you could stay there forever?
Oh my goodness.
I thought, that's love, because I thought you just want me to be. And I said, I am always in your heart. I'm always there. But she wanted me in there so that I could always be with her.
That's amazing.
Isn't that cute?
And that is what love is. And,
Yeah.
and love should be unconditional.
Yeah.
It
yeah.
shouldn't come with conditions. It should be that kind of pure emotion, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, sometimes when we start to apply conditions to love, our sense of what love is
Yeah.
can be completely misconstrued.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too that you shouldn't look for your own happiness in love and within somebody else.
Yeah.
It really should be within yourself, and then the person that you're in love with should really complement that and want to raise you up, as opposed to as not like what Jerry Maguire said, you complete me. You shouldn't actually ever have anybody else completing you. You should complete yourself, but somebody else should elevate you.
I agree. I 100% agree with that. And when we're looking for people to sort of fill that void that we feel we have, we might not be looking for the right people.
Right.
We want to be able to be out on our own, and love shouldn't necessarily change us either, right?
Right.
It's one of the hardest. I think about, like, in terms of emotions, it's one of the hardest ones to, have the courage to move through,
Yeah.
to be open to,
Yeah.
but it does start with the love of yourself. I, years ago, when I think about like how you would define love, I think about this like young man who had moved to Canada, or immigrated to Canada from the Sudan after spending years in a refugee camp with his older brother. And in that particular story, and in that, in his life, before ever going to the refugee camp, he and his brother actually believed they had been orphaned.
Okay.
Their village had been taken under attack by a group of militia fighters. His father was killed in that attack. Both brothers believed that their mother had also been killed. And so when they moved to this refugee camp, their love bonds really kind of grew, right? They
Right.
became each other's protectors.
Each other's rock.
You know,
yeah.
talking to him later, he described how terrifying an experience that was for him as a young man. And all the bad things that were going on within the camp, assaults and rapes and all the things that young men should not have to experience, they were experiencing.
Right.
But they were eventually able to get an opportunity to come to our country, to Canada. And the older brother brought his young brother under his wing and was trying to teach him the way. And they had been here for a couple years when sadly his older brother was out at a house party one night and was savagely beaten to death.
Oh, no.
And so for the second time in this young man's life, he came to face the loss of another family member. But this family member was different. It wasn't just his brother, it was his mother, his father, and his brother.
Right, he represented so much more.
Everything,
Yeah.
right? And the most ironic part of all of this story, maybe one of the most tragic pieces, is a week before his brother was actually killed. They had just found out through the community here that his mom was in fact still alive. So both brothers had already just started putting into plans to bring her to Canada,
Right.
for this reuniting each other. And it fell short, of course, after one brother was killed. He goes on, of course, after this happens, and struck by grief, over the loss of his brother, quits school, quits the things he loves like soccer, right? And just
Started slowly giving up.
takes some time to be angry. And then one day he woke up, to your point, and he looks at himself in the mirror and he says, you know what? I need to love myself. As soon as he did that and embraced the love of himself again, then he could start to embrace all the other things that he loved as well. And his dream to bring his mom here returned.
Right.
And so did his soccer career, and so did his schooling. And he's gone on to be such a successful, amazing individual, but it all started with sort of loving himself.
Right.
And giving him, the strength and the courage to do that, which I think is so, so important. And
Yeah, because it was kind of like all odds were stacked against him with all the trauma that he had gone through.
Totally.
That he had the courage and the recognition that he knew this was going to be powerful, that he needed to love himself. I don't think that comes very easily. So I feel like that really must have been this innate urge that he had.
Yeah, I mean, I tell the story in my second book, Undaunted. I would just share a quick excerpt with you,
Yeah,
if you
please
like.
do.
And I would, just to give you an idea of how remarkable this young man was, I'm going to start it at the point where his brother has just been murdered.
Okay.
Few people would have the strength to recover from this, but the challenges at that age of 17 would be multiplied. For time, there was a dark patch for the younger brother. He quit school and the soccer program he loved, but as he moved through his anger and sorrow, he emerged finally a better version of himself than ever before. Finding the courage to love himself again, when he was ready, he returned to school, returned to work, and returned to the game he loved, soccer. Over the years since I worked on the investigation of his brother's death, we have stayed in touch, and I have been amazed at his strength and continued efforts to focus his love on his family back home. Ever since I have known him, whatever earnings he could spare at the end of the month would go to his mother and other siblings who he has always longed to see again. I was also aware of how much it bothered him that his brother, who was laid to rest in our city, had nothing more than a numbered grave marker to denote where his body was. The sibling he loved deserved a proper headstone. The day he came to me asking for help, I felt honored that he would put trust in me and asked. Putting my thinking cap on, I reached out to a local journalist who I knew could help Together, they set up a crowdfunding site, and she agreed to do a story on him and his incredible life. This response and the love shown by the community was tenfold what he expected. He had a proper headstone made, and I remember the day I went to the cemetery to help walk him through the final process. He was thousands of dollars over what he needed for the headstone. I remember the conflict he had with this. There was no way to return the excess money. So what did he do? In his typical selfless way, it went back to home in Sedan to help his mother and his siblings have a better life. He did not use it for trivial indulgences. Love is about sacrifice. Recently, I had the opportunity to see this young man again and share a plate of food with him and his mother, who, after years of effort and work on her son's part, was finally able to come to Canada. This work was his love made visible. I asked her, if you could bring these things you love about Canada back to your home, what would you bring? And her answers totally surprised me. Peace, water, and shoes.
Wow.
You know, love
So
can
simple.
also be the simplest pleasures. Something we should all never take it for granted, you know?
Wow.
And I that's sort of, I think his story in some way, shape, or form helps define love in a number of different ways. Love to himself, love to a family,
Yeah.
you know, and then his mother's love for the simplest of pleasures, things we take for granted.
And these are like some of those byproducts of these terrible crimes that can happen
Yeah.
that we talk about way in the beginning about the community that rallies to, right? And
That's right.
how just incredible we can be in numbers.
Right.
And to, you know, you were also able to pull your resources together to make it happen for this guy. And this was obviously something that was so important, as, yeah, it definitely should be. And amazing that it all came together that way.
Yeah, no, it was really great. And a testament to the community and the love
Definitely.
for a young man that they didn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
But they supported and
Willingness
supported
to
his-
help.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that that's really what love is. And none of that involved pain.
Right. So, yeah, we've talked about what love is from different perspectives within yourself, from your
Yeah.
kids, in relationship. What isn't love?
Well, I think despite what people think, love is not supposed to hurt, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's something love isn't for sure. It's not about hurt.
Right. And we are kind of taught like, hey, deal with it. Love hurts sometimes.
Right.
And you just have to pick back up.
Right.
But there's definitely different levels of that, obviously, that
For
I'm sure
sure.
you've witnessed too in your career.
For sure. When it goes off the rails, it really goes off the rails.
Right.
You know, and men typically are the ones that get this wrong most of the time. You know, we are, as a group, as a collective group, 85% of the time, abusers in intimate partnerships, right? We are the offenders when it comes to abuse, intimate partner violence, things of that nature. Clearly, that is something that is far away from what love actually is.
Right.
And it's a manifestation of other things. What those things are, it could be insecurities, who knows,
Yep.
right? Jealousy, anger, rage. But that's not love. This has nothing to do with love. It's just misplaced.
Right.
You know, they I think sometimes men act in a certain way because they think that they are showing, who knows what they think they're showing.
Yeah.
But it comes out in awful.
Commitment. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But it comes out in awful, awful ways.
Yeah, of course.
And, you know, as a homicide investigator, a lot of the podcasts, a lot of the stories that we've talked about, you know, I should put a caveat on it. You know, a lot of these stories involve women and children. And, you know, every investigator within our unit has a different experience.
Right.
But sometimes what I found over the years is each one of us would get certain types of investigations over others. You know, like in the time I was there, almost 14 and a half years, and all of the victims I dealt with, only 3 of the victims that I was, you know, investigating their murders were men. The rest of them were women
very
and
many.
children.
Right.
Or other investigators completely different. You know, for whatever reason, those cases always found me.
What do you think is that reason? The assignment or like,
No, it was just, the assignment was so random.
I see.
It just
Just so happened to be the case for you.
Just so happened to be the case. And whatever that was, I'm not sure. So when we talk about women and children a lot,
right,
that's my perspective.
Yeah, it's a large majority of your experience. Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
This young man's brother is one of those cases.
Right.
Where it was a young man that was killed.
Right.
But for the most part, it's always been women and always been children. And so I've become quite aware of how bad it can go and what love actually isn't, you know?
Yeah.
And
when you say when a person acts like they don't care, believe them.
Yeah.
Right?
Such an important
It can be
message.
hard to do that because you want to see what you want to see. So you can kind of reframe that in your mind. But really at the gist of it is just somebody doesn't care. You need to accept and move on, but it's obviously easier said than done.
Well, more than that, I think that when somebody acts like they don't care,
yeah,
it could be a warning sign of something more disastrous to come.
Right.
Right? And maybe the disaster is just going to be an unhappy life or an unfulfilled love with that partner.
Which is pretty disastrous.
It can be.
Yeah.
But it can be so much more consequential than that as
Right.
well.
Right.
You know, and what do I mean by when somebody acts like they don't care? You should believe them. If you're a person that comes home every day and has to deal with everyone else, you know, the mess and the dishes and the supper, and you're not getting the support, like, that's somebody that's probably showing you that they don't really care.
Yeah, right.
You know? But that can also be shown if you come home and you're faced with insult and abuse and all of those things.
Yeah, there's a lot of different labor that can contribute to a household. There's the emotional labor, the invisible labor, you know, there's all the things that are seen that can be done, but emotional is a big one too, because that one, it exists, but it's not always easy to define.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I always say, you know, you need to think of your partner as a mime. And it's not the words that are spoken. I always, you know, I'm a big, I work for an organization, or I volunteer for organizations empowering women that have left abusive relationships. This became something near and dear to my heart after being involved in so many cases of intimate partner violence that went completely wrong. And I really believe that those stories should teach us a lot about when things go completely off the rails. It's often there's been some warning signs leading up to it that we chose to ignore. Not to put the blame on any victim, but they're just things that we didn't.
The red flags.
We didn't pick up on, or we didn't. We dismissed on some level. And it could be just name calling. It could be going through our phones. It could be, you know, questioning where we've been. All of those kinds of things. The need for control. All of that stuff. And I think that if we start talking a little bit more about this, we may actually be able to start to make a dent in this, what we've always classified or characterized as a woman's problem, which is intimate partner violence, which actually it isn't a woman's problem. It is a crisis for women and a problem for men. Right. Because unfortunately, men are the ones that are going to be the abusers most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah.
You know, in our country, 4 years ago, a woman was killed by her intimate partner every 5 or every 6 days, depending on the year.
Wow.
In Canada.
Killed.
Today, as we sit here, one of our daughters will be murdered by a man every 48 hours. That's something that has completely changed.
Yeah. What do you think has led to that increase?
I don't know. I think what's led to the increase is that I think we've started to lose track of what actually love is supposed to be. Right. And we're twisting it and making it into something that it never was supposed to be. You know, I think when we start like thinking about like intimate partner violence and issues like that, and we start to put it in the context of it's our daughters. Yeah, right. It completely changes it. Yeah. And I think men have to really realize that. Yeah. 1 in 4 of our daughters is going to face some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime. 1 in 4. 20% of our daughters are going to have some sort of experience of violence towards them before they're 18 by an intimate partner.
So disheartening.
So
Such a young age,
and-
especially.
and we need to get better at it.
Do you think it's a matter of communicating? You know, we've talked about that so much too in past episodes of just like being an open book, not passing judgment, being a safe space.
It's all
being
about
able
that.
to recognize all of those things, right? I would imagine your support system is also huge in, you know, if
Totally.
you're in an abusive relationship, that's something that you can rely heavily on too, right?
Totally. I think those are all important things. The communication, like we really do need to, particularly as men, sit down with our sons and talk to them about this. And more so, we have to emulate what healthy relationships look like.
Right. Yeah.
You know, we have to show them what that looks like.
Yeah.
And we need to speak out when we see things or know things aren't right.
Yes.
Then that might be
Staying
with
silent can be pretty dangerous
100%,
as well. Yeah.
you know? And then for our daughters, we have to do the same thing. We have to speak to them about it. We have to let them know that they're special, that they're important to us, that they are somebody to be cherished.
Yeah.
And build them up.
Yeah.
Really build them up and make sure that when they leave our grasp as fathers, that they do so as confident young women.
Definitely.
And with the knowledge that they can always come back to us, which is that support piece.
Exactly, yeah, because so much of that can be stripped away by what you think is love, right? Depending on
Totally.
how you've been treated and what you're told, and the unfortunate thing is that people do tend to fall in love, like they fall deep, and then
They
it's
do.
almost like you're in a hole and you can't get yourself out a lot of the time.
That's right.
But knowing that support system is there, I think, is huge for sure.
And you know, and then lastly, I think as people in general, when we think about love, if we want to avoid scenarios that are going to put ourselves or others into jeopardy, we have to recognize that when love has run its course, and sometimes it does, that is the time to take a step back and let it be that way.
Yeah.
Either that or you become Weird Harold that is showing up at your ex-partner's door at all hours of the night, right? Begging for her hand, and it's scary.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't want to be Weird Harold,
You don't want to be weird.
right? and that's because sometimes we can't, you know, again, we think that we have to fight for love instead of recognizing that sometimes love just runs its course.
Just runs its course. It's hard to recognize that sometimes,
It
though,
is.
because the other side of it can be terrifying. And leaving something that, even though it can be painful, is comfortable, sometimes feels safer,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, you're right.
But that courage is also a huge factor.
Yes,
We
that's
talked
right.
about that too. Are there any cases that come to mind specifically that you can talk on about how love can get distorted and twisted and turn dangerous and
So many.
yeah.
Like it's sad, you know,
Yeah.
like the family that introduced me to the organization that I work for, they lost their daughter to intimate partner violence. When she had been in a relationship with a young man for just a very short period of time, she ended the relationship. That was obviously something that he didn't like,
Right.
and took on the attitude that if I can't have you, nobody else can. And ended up murdering her, you know, brutally on a car parking lot in the northeast quadrant of our city years ago. You know, I think of another case just more recently where a man and a woman, more than middle-aged, decided that this wasn't going to work, and the gentleman no doubt took exception to it, and he tied his girlfriend up and threw her over the edge of a balcony and then jumped himself.
Wow.
This is when it gets really twisted,
Right.
right? And this is the danger when we don't recognize that love actually requires us to let go and release instead of like hang on and like fight.
Yeah.
It makes
yeah.
no sense. And
Right.
the fight part is what leads to a lot of these tragedies.
Right. Right.
But the warning signs are almost always there, and they shouldn't be ignored. And so if you're in a situation where, you know, as a man, if you think you trend this way, my advice would always be seek help. The person that you say you love will love you back
Exactly.
for doing that.
Yeah.
You
yeah.
know? and they'll respect you for doing that. And then you're not going to ever end up in some interview suite by some detective who's speaking to you about how your love or your version of love got twisted and contorted to a point you are now in custody for the murder of your partner.
Right.
And I think that's really, really important message to be heard.
Well, it definitely is. And I think that's hard to accept, like even for men to just say, if you think you trend this way, like I think that can perk some ears up, because the help is important to get early on for the reason that you explained. But I think there's a lot of acceptance that, and admission that you need to really be in tune with yourself to know. Right, before it gets to that place.
If we're going to turn some of those statistics that we talked about earlier around,
it has to come.
It has to come. It has to come from this side of the fence, not your side of the fence, my side of the fence.
Right.
Because we are the biggest part of the problem, so therefore we have to be the biggest part of the solution. And I mean, that is something that is so important.
For sure.
So,
for sure.
Yeah.
And when you speak of the support system, any like advice, I guess, so to speak, because as we know, a lot of these cases are, there are so many more people involved than just the two lovers, so to speak, right? And I know there's probably so many parents out there right now who are recognizing this and trying to get their daughter or son out of this relationship, but it's not quite resonating. What do you like recommend for them to do, or is there anything they can do?
I mean, yeah, the thing that they can do, I mean, before your daughter's ever even in this situation, let's have those talks.
Right.
Right. But let's say we haven't had those talks and now we find ourselves in that situation. I think the biggest thing you can do is, again, take a step back and just make sure that they know that you're a safe place to come, and that you will support them through everything without judgment.
Yep.
They will come when they're ready to come. And it may take some time, And for women that are in this situation right now, and they're wondering, will my family support me? Will my family judge me? They will. There will be somebody in your life that will. The problem is that in your current situation, you've been isolated.
Right.
And you don't see it anymore, but I'm telling you right now, there are people that are patiently waiting for you to pick up the phone and say, help me. And there are so many great organizations within our community, within communities across our country, across the United States, that are there to support you.
Yeah, and we're going to list those organizations as well as some phone numbers you can call and resources you can use if you are finding yourself in this situation.
That's right. Yeah. I think it's such an important topic. I really do believe that, how love is misconstrued is behind so many bad decisions.
Right.
And once we start to recognize that.
And you've seen your fair share.
I have.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thanks so much for this conversation today,
Thanks, Nicole.
all about love. And as I mentioned, we will leave those phone numbers and resources in the notes as well, so that you can feel like you can reach out if you're going through this situation.
Yeah. Remember, if they act like they don't care, believe them. Anybody can tell you they love you while they're pulling you by your hair and punching you in the face. And that is the truth and the reality of the situation.
Right. Well, thanks so much, Dave.
Thanks.
And thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
Thanks.
Well, we hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Ride Along. And if you're interested in learning more about Dave's career and the lessons he learned throughout, now that he's on the other side of it, be sure to pick up a copy of his book that he co-wrote with Sarah Cades called Skeletons in My Closet. And keep an eye out for his new release, Undaunted, with Susan Forrest.
My mantra of leaving people better than you found them continues to be my driver. And I hope you're leaving this podcast today feeling inspired, informed, and inclined to live your dash. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe. And take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us on The Ride Along.